Ephesians chapter 4, verse 7. But to each one of us grace has been given, as Christ apportioned it. In this part of our lecture, I'm going to talk about how spinal cord injury impacts sexual functioning. Abbreviations in this part of our lecture include SCI, spinal cord injury, SNS, sympathetic nervous system, PSNS, parasympathetic nervous system, T, thoracic, L, lumbar, and S, sacral. There are two primary mechanisms involved with the attainment of an erection. The first is a spinal cord mediated reflex. This is taking place at S2 through S4, the location of our parasympathetic preganglionic neuron cell bodies. Activation of the parasympathetic nervous system results in vasodilation and penile erection. Simultaneously, also at S2 through S4, there is stimulation of the neurons within the pudendal nerve. These lower motor neurons go to contract pelvic floor muscles, in particular bulbospongiosus and ischiocavernosus. Contraction of these muscles compresses the primary veins of the penis, preventing venous outflow, which helps to maintain the erection produced by the parasympathetic nervous system. If an individual experiences a complete spinal cord lesion, the higher the lesion, the more likely and the stronger this reflex erection is, in particular if the injury occurs above T6. If the injury takes place at L1 or below, however, the individual is much less likely to be able to obtain a reflex erection or to be able to sustain it. At S2 through S4, this is due to disruption of the reflex arc. The parasympathetic nerves act as lower motor neurons to the smooth muscle of the blood vessels of the penis, and these nerves have been damaged. However, the mechanism behind the lack of a reflex erection with complete lesions between L1 and S1 is unclear. In the case of an incomplete lesion, however, functional reflex erection may be present, particularly if the lesion is small and there are large areas of intact white matter. Of the syndromes we discussed, an individual who experiences a hemisection or a central cord syndrome, for instance, would be expected to regain a functional reflex erection. If the lesion, however, is larger and there are large areas of damaged white matter, such as an anterior cord syndrome, a functional reflex erection is much less likely. Instead, we would anticipate this patient to have hyperreflexia. Importantly, it is often difficult to predict with incomplete lesions if the individual will have a functional reflex erection, a hyperreflexive erection, or the inability to obtain a reflex erection. The second mechanism behind the obtaining and maintenance of an erection is a psychogenic erection. This is initiated in the cerebrum. Cortical processing sends input down to the lower thoracic and upper lumbar levels of the spinal cord, where the preganglionic sympathetic nerves in that area are activated. There seems to be a synergy between some of the sympathetic nervous system nerves between T10 and L2 and the parasympathetic nerves at S2 to S4 that is necessary to maintain an erection sufficiently for penetration and complete intercourse. We don't understand the physiology behind this synergism, but both are required in order to have normal sexual functioning. A psychogenic erection is unlikely with complete lesions that are above the level of T10. This is because the brain cannot get the signals down to the sympathetic neurons that it needs. Psychogenic erections are also less likely with injuries to L1 or below. Again, we do not understand the mechanism between L1 and S1. We do know that between S2 and S4, the lower motor neurons to the blood vessels have been damaged. Lesions that occur between T10 and T12 are more variable, depending upon the number of sympathetic neurons that have been damaged. As with reflex erections, individuals who experience an incomplete spinal cord injury that is smaller, leaving large areas of intact white matter, such as in a hemisection or a central cord, are very likely to regain functional psychogenic erection. Individuals who experience a spinal cord injury that is incomplete but involving larger areas of white matter damage, such as an anterior cord syndrome, however, are less likely to be able to develop a functional psychogenic erection. As with the reflex erections, it is often difficult to predict with incomplete lesions the degree to which the individual will regain functional psychogenic erections. To summarize, large spinal cord injuries above the level of L1 will result in a hyperreflexive reflex erection, and if the injury is above the level of T10, an absent psychogenic erection. Large lesions at L1 or below, the patient is unlikely to experience functional reflex or psychogenic erection. If the injury is small, however, with a large area of white matter intact, the patient is likely to regain both functional reflex and psychogenic erections, regardless of the level of injury. And now some additional features of sexuality to be aware of. In males who are able to ejaculate, semen may go retrograde, meaning that instead of coming out of the urethra, the semen may go backwards up into the bladder. This is due to paralysis of the internal urethral sphincter. Additionally, the longer out from the injury, the lower the sperm production and the lower the sperm motility. Thus, fertility decreases after a prolonged period of time following a spinal cord injury. For females, it is important for them to know that they are still able to get pregnant, and if they do not wish to become pregnant, that they need to take the appropriate precautions. In cauda equina syndrome, injury to the dorsal and ventral roots can disrupt the reflex arc, preventing parasympathetic outflow to the blood vessels of the erectile tissues of the penis, thereby preventing the development of an erection. Simultaneously, injury to ventral roots of the pudendal nerve will prevent activation of the bulbospongiosus and ischiocavernous muscles that are responsible for the prevention of venous outflow, thereby inhibiting their ability to help maintain the erection. While difficult to predict, erectile dysfunction in individuals with cauda equina syndrome is common.